hurls a racial slur at a man. Go back to Africa. What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned because his response is not what anyone expects and it's a lesson in dignity. You won't forget, the woman's words didn't just echo in the air. They seemed to pierce the very atmosphere, hanging in the space between them like a heavy fog. The man's entire body tensed up for a moment, an instinctive reaction to the sting of the insult. But he didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice and he didn't react with rage or anger, two responses so many would expect in such a situation. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, almost as if he were grounding himself before responding. The bustling city around them seemed to fall away, and for a brief second, time itself felt as if it had frozen. As he turned to face the woman directly, he saw the crowd begin to gather. People who had been going about their business now stood still, sensing the tension in the air. It was as though everyone around them instinctively knew that something significant was about to unfold. The murmurs of onlookers faded into silence. As they watched the scene, waiting for the next move, the woman, standing firm, had no idea who she was speaking to. To her, this man was simply another black man, someone she assumed she could belittle without consequence. Her words were laced with disdain, as though she saw herself as superior, as though her ignorant hatred gave her the right to dictate where someone should belong. Go back to Africa, she repeated, louder this time, the venom in her voice unmistakable. In her mind, she might have thought the insult would land hard, that it would cut deep or provoke an angry retort. She might have expected him to lash out, to throw words back in her face, or maybe even to physically retaliate. But what she failed to grasp was that the man she was speaking to wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of that response. What she was about to witness wasn't an emotional explosion. It was something far more powerful, the unwavering strength of self-control, the dignity of a person who had heard too many hateful words to be moved by them. This was going to be a moment of calm that would speak louder than anything she could say. The man stood there, still as stone for a brief moment, processing the venomous words that had just been hurled at him. The air between them seemed charged with tension, but he didn't react the way most would expect. Instead of snapping back with an insult, throwing a sharp comment, or issuing a threat, he did something extraordinary. He took a deep breath and, in a calm, almost disarming manner, asked her one simple question. Do you know where Africa is? The words hung in the air, and the crowd who had been eagerly anticipating the fallout from such an aggressive encounter went completely silent. People shifted uncomfortably on their feet, unsure of what would happen next. The woman, who had thought she could provoke a confrontation, now found herself at a loss for words. She had expected a fiery outburst, an emotional reaction that could justify her cruel words. Instead, she was confronted with an unexpected response: calmness, composure, and a challenge to her ignorance. Her face contorted with confusion, and she snapped back, her voice laced with frustration. What's that supposed to mean? Her eyes darted around, seeking support from the crowd, but no one gave her the satisfaction. The man's calm was unsettling. It was the exact opposite of the chaos she had hoped for. With a gentle smile, the man stepped closer to her, maintaining his steady composure. If you want me to go back to Africa, he said, his voice smooth and unshaken, you should at least know where Africa is. It's a big place, with over 50 countries. I'm not sure which one you think I should go back to, but maybe you could help me figure it out. His words weren't aggressive. There was no malice in his tone. Rather than escalating the situation, he invited her into a moment of reflection. He wasn't fighting back. He was asking her to confront the sheer ignorance of her own statement. The crowd, who had witnessed countless confrontations where anger was the fuel, now felt a palpable shift. This wasn't about a man fighting to defend his dignity. It was about exposing the thoughtlessness of a comment that had no place in a respectful society. His response wasn't a battle, it was a teachable moment. It was the power of restraint, where words could easily escalate into something destructive. He chose to dismantle the hatred with education and calm insight. The woman, now visibly unsettled, stood speechless. She had no comeback. She hadn't expected this kind of response. The power of the man's restraint, the way he chose not to match her aggression but instead challenge her ignorance, left her floundering. The crowd, now fully aware of what had just occurred, silently recognized the man's strength, his refusal to be baited, his ability to turn a moment of hate into one of self-reflection, and most importantly, his display of dignity in the face of racism. As the man's calm words settled in the air, the woman's face turned an angry shade of bright red. She had expected an outburst, perhaps even violence, but what she got instead was a thoughtful, measured response that caught her completely off guard. For the first time, she was faced with someone who wasn't reacting to her slurs with outrage or anger. The silence around her grew heavier as she tried to make sense of the situation. What do you mean, where Africa is? She stammered, clearly taken aback and now visibly flustered. She hadn't anticipated that her words would spark such a response. Her entire worldview, at least in this moment, had been shaken. The idea that the man wasn't just accepting her insult but actually questioning it made her feel exposed, like she was the one on trial. The man's voice remained calm, yet each word was sharp with purpose. Do you think that all black people are from the same place? Do you think we all come from one country, one culture? His tone was gentle, but his words were incisive. Do you even know where Africa is on a map? With each question, the woman's foundation crumbled a little more. She had thought of Africa as a singular entity, a vague, distant place, but now she was forced to reckon with the complexity of a whole continent. The woman had never been challenged to think about the vast diversity of Africa's many countries, cultures, and peoples. The man's questions weren't an accusation. They were an invitation to reflect on the ignorance that had led her to make such a sweeping, hurtful statement. By this point, the crowd's curiosity had shifted from passive observation to active engagement. People started to nod, some even exchanging glances of understanding. What they were witnessing wasn't just an exchange about race. It was an exposure of ignorance, of how often people make assumptions about others without knowing anything about their backgrounds. The more the man spoke, the clearer it became that the woman's insult wasn't rooted in any real knowledge. It was built on stereotypes, misconceptions, and lazy thinking that had never been challenged. The woman, now thoroughly flustered, began to mumble, "I didn't mean it like that." Her words came out in a rush, but they were empty. She wasn't just apologizing for the insult, she was trying to cover up her ignorance, but it was too late. The cracks in her argument were too obvious now, and the power dynamics had shifted. The crowd was no longer on her side. Her attempt to backtrack fell flat. The man's response had thrown her off balance, leaving her unable to justify or explain her words. The crowd, now fully engaged, saw through the superficial nature of her comments. They realized that this wasn't just an issue of racism, it was a reflection of the prejudices people often carry without ever being forced to confront them. The woman had expected to dominate the exchange with a simplistic insult, but instead, she found herself disarmed by a man who refused to play into the hostility. His response had shifted the narrative, making it clear that her ignorance was the real issue, and the crowd was beginning to see her for what she truly was, someone who had no understanding of what she was talking about, but who, for a moment, had the audacity to speak as though she knew everything. At that moment, the woman's growing realization became palpable. She was no longer confident in her position. Instead, she was floundering, trying to backtrack and save face, but the damage was done. The man had used his calm and intellect to turn the tables, and the crowd, which had once been uncertain, was now on his side. The woman's attack had been dismantled by the very thing she had hoped to provoke, a response grounded in understanding, patience, and self-respect. As the woman continued to stumble over her words, clearly struggling to backpedal from her initial ignorant remark, the man, in an unhurried yet deliberate manner, took a final step back and addressed the gathering crowd. His demeanor remained steady, unshaken by her attempts to deflect. As he realized that this moment was bigger than just the exchange between him and the woman, it was a moment for everyone to learn from. "Here's the thing," he began, his voice rising just enough for everyone to hear clearly. The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "I wasn't born in Africa. But even if I had been, it wouldn't change who I am, or the value I bring to the world. Racism like this is based on one thing: ignorance. And until we confront that ignorance, it will continue to divide us." His words resonated deeply with the crowd, as they were not just a defense of himself, but a broader statement about the power of ignorance and the dangers it posed to society. The man's message wasn't filled with anger or resentment. Instead, it was an invitation to introspection. His calmness contrasted sharply with the woman's earlier venom, and his ability to stay composed under pressure made his words all the more impactful. As the man finished speaking, the woman, now visibly shaking and defeated, glanced around. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she realized that the crowd was no longer on her side. They had heard his words, seen his composure, and recognized the truth in his message. Her own words, laced with hatred and ignorance, were now utterly hollow in comparison to the thoughtful, intelligent response she had just received. With nothing left to say, the woman muttered something under her breath, perhaps an apology. But it was too late. She quickly turned away, her walk stiff and hurried. As she exited the scene in complete defeat, the crowd stood in stunned silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. There was no shouting, no chaos, no heated argument. It wasn't about proving who was right or wrong in the traditional sense. It was about standing tall and confronting ignorance with education and grace. In that moment, the man had shown everyone that the real power lies not in how you respond to hate with more hate, but in how you rise above it, challenging ignorance with calm, measured strength. For those who had witnessed the exchange, it was clear that this encounter was not just a simple confrontation, it was a powerful lesson in dignity, restraint, and the ability to turn an unfortunate moment of hate into an opportunity for growth and reflection. The crowd, once passive observers, now walked away with a deeper understanding of the importance of addressing ignorance head-on, and how sometimes the most effective weapon against hate is not anger, but wisdom and self-respect. As the woman disappeared from the scene, her defeat palpable, the man stood surrounded by a growing group of onlookers who had witnessed the entire interaction. There was a brief, charged silence as the crowd processed what they had just seen. The man, ever composed, offered a simple but powerful gesture. He smiled at the crowd and said, "Thank you for listening." With that, he turned and continued on his way, as if the whole incident had never happened. Yet for those who had watched it unfold, the moment would never be forgotten. The man's words and actions had left a profound impact on everyone present. What had begun as a hostile confrontation had transformed into a teachable moment about dignity, restraint, and the power of self-respect. The woman's words, which had once seemed like a blatant attempt to divide and insult, were now exposed for what they truly were: ignorance fueled by hate. She had not won the encounter. In fact, her ignorance had been dismantled by the very calmness and intelligence she had hoped to provoke. On the other hand, the man had proven that there was far greater power in remaining composed and thoughtful in the face of hate. His quiet response, instead of escalating the tension, diffused it completely. It was a masterclass in how one person's ability to stay calm in the face of anger and insult can turn the tide of an entire interaction. He hadn't fought back with words or raised his voice, but with wisdom and self-respect. This, the crowd realized, was the real strength. As the man disappeared into the crowd, the lingering effect of what had just happened was undeniable. What they had witnessed was not just a personal victory for him, but a universal lesson that transcended the moment. It was a stark reminder that the way we respond to hate says more about who we are than the hate itself. His calmness had taught them all that, no matter how cruel the words or actions of others, we all have the power to choose our responses. This moment wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about proving that hate could be turned into understanding, simply by choosing not to engage with it on the same level. It was a powerful, silent statement that, in the end, the greatest weapon we have against division and ignorance is not anger, but the ability to respond with grace and clarity. And for the people who had witnessed this exchange, it was a lesson that would stay with them long after the encounter was over. And just like that, what began as a moment of hatred turned into a powerful lesson in dignity, self-respect, and the importance of how we choose to respond to hate. The man's calmness and intelligence didn't just defuse the situation, it shifted the entire narrative. He showed us all that the real strength lies not in matching hate with more hate, but in responding with understanding and grace. Thank you for watching this incredible story unfold. If this moment made you think, or if it inspired you to take a stand against ignorance and hate, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the status quo. And share this video to spread the message of resilience and the power of responding with wisdom. Remember, it's how we respond that defines us. Let's choose to make the world a better place, one thoughtful response at a time. See you in the next video.